Hey friend, welcome to the studio. My name's Alain Picard and we're going to do a portrait demonstration today of an African child. Something different, we're going to use black UART sanded paper. UART's my favorite sanded pastel surface, and I usually use their normal natural colored paper or buff colored paper where you push the darks into the lighter colored paper. In this case, we're going to use black and we're going to pull the light out of this dramatic dark surface. So hopefully that'll be an exciting and unique difference. Confession, I've used this paper 3 times in my long life. It's brand new. They're just rolled it out this calendar year. So excited to share it with you, and let's get started, shall we? Well, with this darker surface, I can't draw with like a charcoal or with a black pencil or anything really using a dark on the lighter surface. So what we'll need to do is try to use something that's a little bit lighter than the paper. I'm always liking to use kind of a little bit lighter or a little bit darker for my initial sketch. So I've got a new pastel. This actually looks like it's a credit color, but it's a violet, and should work well. One other thing, I did a little preliminary study of my little friend Evelyn that I met in Rwanda. That's over here. It provides me with 2 things. I just did it before we pressed record, and that gets my arm going, gets my mind going, gets my eye connected to my hand as I create that thumbnail. Also, it helps me to problem solve the composition here on this 11x14 UART sanded board. This is actually the board, and I know you're probably going to ask, so this is 400 grit. This is kind of the medium grade grit for the sanded paper. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I've got my reference off to the right. Just as if I was working from life, I can just tip my head a little bit and I can see my reference material. And I'm just going to squint my eyes, going to pull the shutters down on my eyes and see the simple masses. I just want to see dark and light. I don't want to see detail. And I'm going to pull out, basic abstract shapes. I'm going to look for those simple, big triangles that build the composition. And in this portrait, it's basically a head study, and it's a wonderful little moment because the child has banana leaves on her head. And so what we have here is her out in the woods, in the Rwandan forest, and she's got banana leaves which are used to carry things on top of your head, and this was probably an old discarded banana leaf wreath, and she grabbed it and put it on her head. And it just creates beautiful context for the portrait. So I'm just going to frame out, kind of crudely, the big basic abstract shapes of this piece. So I can see kind of where things fall. I kind of want to work from the outside in. I want to frame out the big basic shapes. I'm looking at those negative shapes and seeing how they fall. I'm going to just check the big angles. This isn't going to look very good for a little while, but it's a wonderful way to frame out the portrait and ensure that my composition is going to fall exactly where I want it to. Checking little angle points, like where does the blouse intersect with her face. She has this fun little collar on that looks like a princess's gown in a way. So we got this wonderful collar we can pull out, create some enjoyable, almost costuming that creates interest for the portrait. So I'm just finding this basic shape. It's not going to be just right on this first pass, but it'll get me in a ballpark, and then I'll start to hone in. Collar on the left side of the face. It's important as you work, especially at the beginning of a piece, to back up a lot. Just really take a step back and kind of look and observe more than you transcribe. It's very important to work with a lot of observation in the process. Do some measuring here to place an ear. Check angles. Sometimes I'll use a stick, this little skewer stick, and I'll just kind of check angles really quickly to see how things are coming together. It's a great way to make sure that the drawing is going to move in the right direction right at the beginning. That side of the head. Check the level line to see whether the ears are on an axis with each other. That is correct. At the beginning of the portrait, especially in a painterly style where we want to be loose and bold, we want to create these wonderful marks that have energy and vitality when we begin to paint. The drawing, the proportions are important. So what I'm doing now is really framing out some shapes that I can then really loosely paint. So if I do a little hard work now, it's kind of like eating your vegetables when you have dinner, right? You got to have that good, healthy stuff, and then you get to have dessert. Well, if I do my drawing and I set my proportions in place correctly, then when we get to painting, boy, we're going to have some exciting marks, and it's going to be decadent. It's going to be rich with that soft pastel. So the headdress is going to live in this upper area. Just going to check an angle here. Even for me, it's a little funny to draw with a light color on dark, but it's an exciting and unique way to kind of break my own self out of routine, try something different. I think that's a fantastic way to stimulate creativity and new ideas, is to break yourself out of routine. Routine has a lot of positive things. I'm not bashing routine. I love discipline and routine, but at some point you also need to stimulate through doing something different. So this black paper is a great way to try that. All right, so I'm getting to a place where I'm just about ready to mass in with some pastel. Starting to feel out these basic shapes. Okay. So I've got basically a few shapes. I just want to show you there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's basically 5 big shapes in this painting, and compositions are strong when they're simple. So having like a simple understanding of the masses, like you see in the drawing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though we're going to build some interesting little things and textures and color differences, knowing those big shapes is very helpful in being able to lay them out in specific areas. So now I'll just begin to select some different colors. I've got to get, just a basic, man, that's already too light. It's amazing when you start dark how quickly things will look light. I've got a kind of a nice dark brown in my hands here. So my normal process is to go darks, middles, lights, darks, middles, lights. And since we're on black, we already have dark. So we're gonna work, I've got a middle dark in my hands. And I would say that from a value standpoint, this whole painting lives in the middle dark, in that side of the value spectrum. The lights are gonna be more the accent values of this painting. So we have to go up the value scale and begin both to key the color, but also the value. And I tend to do that from dark to light. So I'm just getting some of this warmer chocolate brown in on this black. Nothing very exciting yet. And I'm using side strokes, which is a massing approach, and that allows me to just focus on tonal statements, not detail yeah, focusing on tone, not detail. It just gets the values going. As you can see, I'm just starting to lay in some tone for the face. Just want to have a little local color there for the skin that I can work on top of. Beautiful, cool highlights, really warm midtones in the reds and in the violets, but cool highlights on the African type 6, that dark brown skin. Let's just really give ourselves something to look at by popping some light out and just beginning to understand where a little bit of lighter values could be. And when you have that black paper, it happens fast. You use a light value and kaboom. Very exciting very quickly. So this is a soft, square-shaped pastel. I use a number of different types. People always ask me, what pastels are you using? Well, I'm using lots of different ones. This feels like a Great American pastel. However, I use Terry Ludwig. I use all kinds of Schminke, Unisan. I'm testing out some of Richardson's handmade soft pastels. They look really good. So the important part for me is that it's very soft and that the wrappers have been removed from the pastels so that we can really make those marks. That's what's important for me. Let's jump in and get some of this greenish ochre around the top of the head. I'm just squinting my eyes again, just looking. This whole stage of the painting is a massing in stage. Really, we're just trying to get an understanding of how things lay out. It's hard to see, but in that violet hard pastel, I kind of framed out where this little swath of banana leaf is dangling. So I knew really right where to put it in. And coming down this way, I love these kind of single strands and the dynamism of how they move around the head and frame the portrait in an exciting way. I'm going to go a little darker to, here's a little bit more of a greenish umber version of the, or greenish ochre version. Get that kind of big cluster going. We can make sense of it later. What's wonderful about these premium boards is they're very durable. I've taped mine up. If you're wondering what's going on here, I taped the board up to a surface so that I can work freely. But you can beat these things. You can really work quite rigorously. You can wash on them. It doesn't make much sense to wash when you're using black, but who knows? I haven't experimented much with it yet. I could be wrong. Wouldn't be the first time that I've been wrong. So just building some of that framing in. Let me take a step back and let's bring in some other browns quickly. Just get that a nice warm brown. There's these fantastic little clusters and brambles of the leaves. And we've got to build mark on top of mark. Pastel being a layering medium, we can layer in a number of colors, one on top of the next, a number of textures, you know, wide marks and then squiggly strokes that bring different kind of linear energy to it. And we begin to build this little story. Just looking at the edge of the ear, just a little lightening of the brown. Maybe I'll use a linear mark to state that at this stage, come around that edge of the jaw. And it's a very demure gaze that our portrait reveals, where the child is kind of peeking up from inside of this banana wreath. So she's kind of looking up, lots of the face, very low, and really very charming pose to study. Another thing I like to do when I'm working in a painterly fashion as I'm massing in is get the background in right away. I don't wait to the end like, oh, I'll paint the portrait first, that's the front part, and then I'll paint the background later, that's the afterthought. I really try to build a dynamic relationship between the portrait and the background. So right away we're going to begin to mask that in, and I'm looking for some shifts toward grayish green. I really want to understand some of these basic shapes and how they relate to one another. So getting this negative shape of the background in is going to help us so much to see that. And there's some interesting lighting effects happening in the background. They call Rwanda the land of 1,000 hills. It's very temperate. It's about the size of Maryland, I believe, and it's very beautiful. The weather is similar to San Diego, kind of beautiful, temperate, 70 degrees weather. And wow, it's a gorgeous place. And so there's all kinds of tropical-like plants and trees that we can enjoy. You can also go and see the silverback gorillas. This, I believe, was a place called Ruangari, and that's right at the foothills of the volcanoes, where you can go with a guide and see the silverback gorillas. Kind of cool anecdote to this little girl's world where she lives. All right, let's go a little bit more towards the gray for now, not too much color, maybe some gray and violet gray. It's probably too light. Yeah, let's go a little darker than that. There it is. Squint, squint, squint. We really want to allow our eyes to simplify what we see. Oh, I love this color. It's probably still too light though. Let's push down the value scale a little bit more. Here I've got a little bit more of a mauve-like color. You know, sometimes I'll just let myself go places too. If the value works and it's close enough, it's a little redder than what I was considering, it may work really well for the painting, so I'll give it a shot. With the layering effects of pastel, you can adjust that pigment in a subsequent layer if it's too red or too light or too whatever. All right, let's go back a couple steps and soak it in. Okay, so this mass is very dark. We want to lighten that up. I'm going to grab a couple more grays. Clean my fingers. And as I squint, I'm going to just actually sketch a little bit with the tip of this soft pastel. Check the collar from side to side. I tend to do a lot of the detail work later, after I frame the portrait out. I'll develop and refine after I mass in. Basically, I really want to get a dynamic composition working first, and make sure all the big shapes are falling in the right place. Like this shoulder that I'm moving over a little bit. There's a rim light at the edge of Evelyn's shoulder on her blouse. We'll call it a blouse, because I'm not sure what else to call it at the moment. So we'll get some lighter value there, and then we'll shift towards a little deeper valued gray, more of a mid-tone valued gray as we see the front. Now we're talking. We get around this face, and I'm just trying to sensitize myself visually to the big outside shapes, the big shape impact. Like as I come around this chin, what is the basic shape of that face? Proportion, likeness. We nail that when we get the big shape relationships correct. I always say no amount of detail is going to save errors in your proportions. So now we're starting to feel that rim light as we bring this mid-tone in, and I just want to continue to mass it in. I'm going to use a bit more of a greenish turquoise mixed into this. It's a cute little button there that will build out. Perhaps I'll just locate it with a circle. And friend, I can't stress to you enough how much I do this. When at this stage of the painting, like this is just not helpful. That I can just see far too much information. This is helpful because it's about value, simple dark middle light, and it's about shape. And this forces me not to see the detail. So just encourage you, squint, 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 simple, simple, simple. I'll be alone in my studio at times saying simple, 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 squint, squint. Thankfully, since I'm alone, nobody hears me, or else, you know, they would commit me. They'd put me in some sort of facility. But you and I know that I'm fine. All right, we're going to grab a little bit more of this greenish, kind of a different shades, similar but different in here, just trying to get a little more of that greenish-ness to the blouse and kind of build the basic area without that black coming through. Essentially, I want the big value relationships to read well in the painting at a fairly early stage. So I'm trying to quickly build them all together so we begin to accomplish that. What I find when I do that is it is so much easier to lay in the little details, the little things. They almost begin to fall into place when you have the big shapes correctly located. And you might notice I'm actually making these subtle adjustments to how things are locating compared to my first sketch and my first pass. So it's about kind of a constant iteration where you just continue as you progress to make adjustments and look for deviations from what you're observing, what the painting ought to look like, and just continuing to make those adjustments, really. Let's come over here and just deal with that for a moment, and then we'll go back into the face. I actually kind of restrain myself from jumping in and doing all the fun stuff. I've got some exciting glowing color in the leaves, a little bit of orange over here. Just going to check the location of it. It's probably a little further out than I had it that first time, right in there. And the sun is behind us here, and it's illuminating these translucent banana leaves. So that's fun. Throw a little bit in there. Let's see, another dark brown, a couple more dark browns. I think I'll get a dark green. Just gonna check if I've got this in the right spot. Very important as it frames the edge of the head. So just to state this again, when I tend to use the tip and I'm using linear strokes, even with the soft pastels, I'm separating shape from shape. I'm delineating the two different things. When I go in and I mass, I use the side stroke. I'm placing tone, color, and value into the shape. So if I shift towards that side stroke, I'm probably kind of drawing out the shape again and delineating where these shapes separate from one another. So linear marks and side strokes, a couple of different mark making approaches in the vocabulary of mark making. I'm a huge advocate for a variety of different stroke types in your painting and for understanding what kind of mark accomplishes what you're after. And sometimes you got to have little tiny marks, sometimes you need big bold marks that carry energy and power. If you have all little tiny marks, it tends to create almost an idiosyncratic feeling, which can work great in a certain painting, but the combination of small and big, of passive and aggressive, of exciting, energized and quiet, of detailed and out of focus, these combinations of contrast create interest in the painting. So now I'm starting to get a better feel for where that face is going to occupy the portrait, and I'm excited by that. As you can see, through this part of the face, it's the darkest part. There's a core shadow through this portion of the face right here, and then the other left side, we're going to place a bit of a ambient rim light on Evelyn's face. That'll create some form and dimension for her. I also use Diane Townsend's beautiful pastels. I believe I'm using one right now. There's just so many incredible pastels on the market today. Sennelier, Henri Rocher pastels. I've got a handful of those and they are beautiful. So a real deep, rich cluster in this area. So I really want to build that dark value cluster. I know we have black paper, but as we build the actual content in its native color and value. Okay, I'm going to take a step back, get my fingers clean. I use a lot of wet wipes to clean up those fingers. I always say dirty hands, dirty painting. Sometimes dirty palette, dirty painting, but my friend Desmond O'Hagan has shown us that that is not the case. His palette is filthy and his paintings are stunning. Well done, Desmond. It's kind of magical. We don't know how he does it. Okay, let's jump back in for some of the little background lights that frame out. There's this exciting, odd, tropical kind of wonderful greenish thing happening behind the head. And I'm going to use a little bit of that lime green. I'm going to switch over to some warmer yellows as well in a moment. This is a different shade of a yellowish green that will slip in there. Maybe we'll just sneak that over on the side just so it's not alone. And let's see, maybe a bit of golden, orangey golden yellow mixed around the edges of that. Get this sense that all kinds of color and light is sparkling behind our subject. So little linear strokes around the head here. You can see I'm building behind the shape, and this is an ear that we're just kind of dealing with as a flat shape at the moment. And I'm kind of just looking for those, how the shapes balance out with one another. Looking for another yellow ochre that I can bring in over on this right side. Just check the location. Right there. See, I used a level line just to check. Sometimes I'll use a plumb line to check up and down and a level line to check left and right. Make sure my shapes are relating well to one another. Sometimes I'll put in a shape rather haphazardly and then I'll carve in on it with the next layer. I'll kind of chop in a very sculptural way. That's an exciting painterly effect to be able to sculpt and push and pull. So you might maybe chop back in on something with the next layer. All right, I need some violet gray over there, some deep violet gray. So let's find some of that. Maybe we'll use it here as well. Right here, over here. There's a tapestry happening between the banana leaves in the background, between what's in focus and out of focus. So I'm going to try to build up that tapestry, checking shape locations in my painting again, just to ensure that we're moving in the right direction. So now maybe just pop this shoulder out a little more. Just check that location here. Over the shoulder and around. Just begin to clarify that foreground blouse element. I'm just going to finish massing in the last parts of my background and basically getting that block in stage done, and then we're going to go to developing the face. So let me finish up this background here so we can keep moving. So this is a case where I am chopping in on these leaves again with little negative shapes, little holes that I see between the leaves, and carving out those leaves by utilizing negative shapes. Okay, so I basically have color masked in over the whole piece. I'm really going to want to go into another phase of the portrait now where I develop the face. So this is kind of like a mass in. As you can see, there's a very flat face. That's going to be the next pass on this painting. So love to just kind of create lots of bold, broad strokes and sculptural marks in that first stage.